Hello and welcome to the Her Ascension Story podcast, where you get to hear the behind the scenes of inspiring life stories to help normalize the reality of the full human experience. I'm your host, Sarah Tillamont, and it's an honor to hold this space with each guest and with you. For more, follow the show on your favorite platforms and at Her Ascension Story on Instagram. And of course, feel free to share with your friends and your family to start your own soul chats like this. Welcome back to another episode. Today I want to talk about how I handled my recent PTSD trigger because I feel like it could be helpful for people who experience PTSD of any kinds. Mine is around sexual assault, but also for anybody who experiences any intense anxiety or stress or an emotional trigger of any kind, really. So recently I went out of town and I experienced a trigger, or as I like to call them, an activation or an activating experience. And I was laying in the hotel bed that night and just kind of replaying the day and thinking, wow, that did not go as I expected. That's not how I wanted things or hoped things would go. Obviously, I wanted things to go better, but at the same time, I was really proud of myself for how I got through it. And I realized that there was this kind of 10-step process or a method that actually got me through it and helped me create a situation better than it could have been. So that 10-step process is what I really want to share. But before I do, I kind of have to set the scene here, right? So I was out of town, somewhere completely new. I've only visited this city just from like layovers or transfers in the airport. The day before this experience, I went to a game with thousands of people, and usually before that would trigger me. My traumatic event was at a party where I didn't know anybody. It was like a big block party, and everybody was drinking, everybody was having fun. I was only there with like two of my friends. I was in a city that I had never been in, actually, too. And what happened was I went into the house, which was kind of more of a private area instead of everybody partying on the street. Didn't know anybody in the house. And then I ended up being sexually assaulted by 4 different men that night. So usually being at big groups of people, right? I mean, there had to be hundreds of people, at this event. And this is back in 2010. And so since then, being around big groups of people would be triggering. But because I've been using these different practices, these different healing modalities, working on myself as an integrative therapist and a spiritual coach, and doing all this work on myself, I've noticed that things have actually gotten easier. And the different things that I've tried are like energy therapy, body work. I've done meditation, shamanic healing. I've done EMDR, CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, so many different things, right? And so while that helps with the big picture, and it did help with a lot of the big, intense, overall triggering experiences, like being around thousands of people, I think that what it is now is like still bigger groups of people, but the whole stranger thing, like strangers and being in places that are new, that's kind of where it's still at for me. And that's fine because healing is a journey, right? It's a path. Like Trevor Hall says in his amazing song, you can't rush your healing. And that's one of the big things. So went to the game, thousands of people. Before that would trigger me. And now I'm like, oh, this is exciting. Like, I want to meet new people. I want to experience new things, all of this, right? It's great. But I went to a party or an event the next day with around 300 people, and that's where the trigger happened. And I used these 10 steps to really get me through the triggering experience. What I really want to kind of like hone in here is that any of these individual steps can be used on their own by themselves, but together is how they worked for me. And that's what it's all about. It's about finding what works for us, and especially finding what works for that moment, because like so many different triggering experiences, each one is unique. Every day is different on our healing journeys, right? So sometimes we need more, sometimes we need less, sometimes we need to, get every single tool out of the box to try to help us. So here they are. The first step was to just allow myself to simply be aware that I was being triggered. It sounds so simple, right? But it really is key, because how many times can you reflect back on your life and see that you kind of just pushed through being overwhelmed, overstimulated, full anxiety, full stress? You just pushed through it, right? Like you were like, oh, it's there, but I have better things to do, or I don't have time for that, or blah, 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 blah. And that's what happens when we've experienced trauma or trauma long enough. We kind of have this choice, or sometimes, and for me, it was over a decade, I just ran on autopilot and kind of just lived in this triggered state, whether it was subtly, whether it was functional, whether that it was overwhelming. And so the second thing, after saying, I'm not going to push through this, I'm actually going to be aware it is happening. Let me just witness it. And witnessing it is what opens the door to shifting away from to pushing through it, and instead attempting to grow through it. And so after that, I needed to ask my body, what do you need? Because the body is what was trying to keep me in this protective, in this survival mode, like it's meant to. It's like, hey, this is very similar to what we've experienced in the past. Are you sure we're okay? And so instead of pushing my body away and saying, oh, this is just an emotional thing, oh, I just need to change my thoughts, right? I asked my body what it needs. So I went into the bathroom and just needed a little private space. And I was like, okay, body, do you need to flight? Like, do you need me to leave the situation, go somewhere that we feel better, where we feel safer? Or do you just need this overwhelming energy released? What do you need? And this is why somatic work is just so powerful for when dealing with PTSD triggers or just triggers in general. And for me, it can make or break what happens after. Like if I spiral even further, if I'm like taking 10 steps back on my healing journey, or if I can just stop where I am, not spiral any further, and maybe, no pressure here, but maybe take one step forward, right? So my body was like, yo, I'm overwhelmed. We need to get rid of this kind of intense. I keep using the word overwhelming, but what I mean is like fully absorbed energy, like fully engulfing just every part of me. And so what I did was I just shook my body. That looked like shaking my hands, shaking my legs, kind of jumping up and down a little bit, kind of swaying back and forth, breathing, because somatic work is any combination of breath, sound, and movement. And really what my body needed in that moment was just for some activation so it could disperse or burn off some of that overwhelming energy and create space for regulation to happen. So here's the big thing. When we are being triggered, we're in a very primal state, right? Yes, sometimes we are able to be like, okay, I am aware of it, I'm witnessing it, and I can just tell my body it's okay. And sometimes the body responds, right? Sometimes we need to do something else. And that can look like, instead of regulating our nervous system, which kind of goes into more functional rest, more focusing on, the day-to-day sort of things, sometimes it needs activation when it's triggered. And it can look like the somatic movement of dancing, breath, sound movement, whatever you need, right? Shaking is just really common, and it really does help. So I think that that's one big thing to note here, is that the body has a big part in it. And sometimes we can't regulate our nervous systems until we activate it. Sometimes it needs activated, not regulated. Once it's activated, once we've kind of like released the stimuli or the overstimulation, the overwhelm, the intense energy, then we can kind of try to navigate our way into more regulation, which is what I did next. So the fourth thing I did was ground myself, especially focusing on my lower body. And I did this because if you look at integrative therapy, if you look at Reiki, if you look at the energetic components of our body, if you look at the physical components of our body that also relate to emotional and mental aspects of life, then you will see that the lower body, the earth chakra, is at the bottom of our feet, which help us feel very grounded, make us feel like we're present on earth and not like up in the clouds or anything like that. Like when we say like we're down to earth, we're focusing there. Like those chakras are really strong. And then we look at our root chakra, which is at our tailbone. It's like our bones, deals with our genitals. It's our primal innate habits, etc. But it's also our feelings of safety, security, and feeling like we have a foundation in life, a strong foundation. So that's really where I wanted to focus. And I focused a little bit on the sacral because that's where some of the trauma, lingered. So just allowing myself to be lower body focused and just being like, oh, I am present. My body is here. I am safe in my body. I am safe in this bathroom stall right now. I am safe in this bathroom. I am safe in this environment that I am in. Kind of questioning, like, yeah, I am safe. But even despite all of that, because in a triggered state, sometimes we can't even have those thought processes. Sometimes it's best to just do a grounding practice, like focusing on how heavy our feet feel on the floor, picturing tree roots growing out of the bottom of our feet, picturing our energy just kind of like being rooted or anchored, or sending the energy down into the middle of the earth, or imagining the earth having these beautiful hands that come up and kind of just hold our feet where we are. Whatever feels good. So after grounding, then I just sealed my energy. So I feel present more. I feel a little bit more calmer because I'm like reminding myself, okay, I'm here. I'm okay. And then sealing my energy is what allows myself to just kind of close off that bubble, because we all have these bubbles, we all have these auras. And I know this sounds a little bit woo-woo for some of you maybe, but I feel like we're in this state of the world where we kind of just get things now like this. But deep down, at like a very subtle and energetic level, when we're experiencing intense stress, anxiety, fear, anything like that, we can actually cause holes or tears in our aura. And I don't mean this to like frighten anybody. I'm just saying it how it is. And it's so easy to fix because you can just picture this bubble, any color that feels good to you, and just kind of seal around you. You're cutting yourself off from overstimulation doing that. And you're also having an energetic ripple effect that will impact the body, the emotions, and the thoughts. So after that, that's when I started feeling like the overwhelm is starting to calm down. So after the overwhelm is gone and I can really start thinking with a little bit more clarity now, I question any thoughts that are coming up. And what was coming up for me in that moment was, I'm not worthy of this experience, this happy party, this cool environment, really great people there, all of that. I'm not worthy of this because of what happened to me in the past. And obviously that sounds silly, but trauma messes with our minds and our self-talk, and it can take turns out of nowhere. And so questioning this is what really helped me even see the correlation between the two events, both parties, both, people that I don't know, new city, all of that. And so some of those thoughts that I experienced when I experienced that trauma, because one of the guys was just fucking awful. Like he was telling me that I was a piece of shit and that I wasn't worth the breath in my lungs and all of that. And so that voice came back up in a very similar situation that was triggering me. So realizing that, I was able to question it and obviously say like, no, you're not right. I do deserve this. I deserve all the good things. I deserve meeting nice people. I deserve having good experiences, all of that, right? But even if we aren't aware of where those voices are coming from, it's still worth questioning. So after I realized, okay, this voice is in my head, doesn't matter where it came from, it's not true, I told myself, just forget showing up perfectly. That's just a personal habit of mine, pattern that I'm trying to break is perfection, or ambition for perfection, ambition to be the best that I can be, all that. And just tell myself it's okay if I'm awkward. It's okay if I'm scared. It's okay if I'm activated or triggered right now. It's okay if I don't say the right thing. It's okay if I insert whatever, anything that I normally wouldn't do if I wasn't triggered or activated. And this doesn't mean for me to go into unhealthy coping mechanisms like drinking or anything like that. For me, it's just allowing whatever behavior that is coming up because of this trigger, it's allowed. And I'm not saying that drinking or anything like that is the wrong thing to do. Obviously, I'm not going to promote it because I think that there are healthier options. But I think it's also worth noting that sometimes we have to allow ourselves to have a path and process and not feel shame or guilt around it, especially if it's something that we've experienced in the past. It's not something that we have a choice to make a decision on right now on how we want to proceed or how we want to show up for ourselves. Because in the past, I did rely on cannabis to kind of numb out or take the edge off of triggers. And I'm not going to say that that's necessarily wrong or right. I don't think it's about right or wrong here. I think it's about just having courage to show ourselves love. And that can be hard even in itself. So don't think that there's shame or guilt on how we deal with things. I think everything is a process, and we need to give ourselves some damn grace. And when we give ourselves some damn grace, sometimes that opens up the opportunity to make healthier decisions on how to support ourselves. So I was telling myself, forget perfection. And the next thing that I needed to do was I needed to promise myself to not tell myself that I shouldn't be triggered, that I shouldn't be scared, that I shouldn't feel this way, that I shouldn't think this way, that I shouldn't be behaving this way, because none of that actually matters. And telling myself that could just amplify any ounce of shame around it and catalyze re-traumatizing myself essentially in a whole new way. The ninth thing that I did was remind myself that I'm safe in this moment, that this event isn't that event, and that what happened then is not going to happen now. And that does take asking the honest question of, am I actually safe? And if I am not safe, I need to do something about it. If I am safe and it's just this trigger, it really is just this fear, then I can even ask for an ancestor or a guide or somebody who loves me unconditionally, because we have free will, right? And we always want to make free will. If we're asking for something out of free will, we want to make sure it's like in our best interest, right? To just kind of offer me more protection or more comfort, or just be by my side as I go through this or anything like that. And that really does help. It's even like an EMDR method, but that's beside the point. This is more spiritual aspect. So really, I could stop here. If I feel safe, which is ultimately the goal when we're being activated or being triggered, we want to make sure that we end up feeling safe if we are working towards growing through that trigger. I could stop there, right? But I like to go a little bit further and do something which could be called pendulation, almost like titration, with the somatic experiencing method from Dr. Peter Levine. And I kind of say, I'm going to challenge myself a little bit here to find comfort in the discomfort. So for me, I knew I didn't want to leave that event. I was having fun, and it was a really cool experience. It was something that I was looking forward to for a long time. And I was just also still so afraid, throughout the whole thing. Like going forward, I was still experiencing anxiety, but it wasn't as bad. I was allowed to function. So, what I wanted to do was add a new element of comfort during it. So, I wanted to challenge myself and still engage with other people, with strangers in this new environment, in this new city, which was the discomfort, which was the trigger. But I would do that for like 10 minutes. And then I would take 5, 10, 15, however much of time I needed to experience the opposite polarity of comfort. And what offered me that comfort was talking to somebody that it was a really good conversation, or even working, because I love my work. I'm passionate about it. And I was like, oh, a whole weekend without doing any kind of work, like that feels weird, just because it's my passion. So that's what I did. I pendulated between going and kind of gently almost activating myself, I guess you could say, putting myself in discomfort, and then going back into a comfortable space, and then going back and forth. And that allows for a breakthrough, because you're not focusing just on the discomfort in the trigger. You're allowing yourself to experience the polarity. And as you're doing so, you're expanding your growing edges, which is what I want to talk about next, because this was my bonus step. You don't have to do this. It's just really helpful sometimes. But I like to challenge myself to expand my growing edge when I'm being triggered. So I learned this in yin yoga when I was practicing before I even became a yoga teacher. And I've carried it with me ever since. And a growing edge is, you have 1 in 10, right? 1 being I can do this all day, 10 being like, oh my God, this fucking sucks, this scares me, or this is going to kill me, anything like that, right? For a growing edge, we're expanding the comfort zone, right? We're pushing it out just a little bit further, right? Growing it. We want to be at a 6 or a 7, because at 6 or 7, we know we're not going to go over the edge. We're not falling. We're not going to death or anything like that. But we're also far from being backed against a wall or put in a corner or staying small or anything like that at a 1. So I thought, what's the one discomfort or challenge? And how can I show up in a way that will make me either laugh or be proud of myself for questioning or going up against this trigger when I look back on this? And for me, that day, it was going into the private party room, which was the scariest thing because I didn't know anyone. And it's very, very, very similar to my traumatic experience. Smaller space, people I didn't know, new city, all of it, right? The smaller space is where it happened. So I was like so resistant against going there. But as I did this, I went into that room. I talked for like less than a minute probably. And then I was like, okay, I'm here. And I'm going to go back to that pendulation. This is the extreme discomfort for me. What's going to bring me a lot of pleasure so that I'm not like fully triggered or just basking in discomfort here. And that was work. So I worked for a little bit, which if I look back now that I'm out of that situation, now that I've had time to integrate it and all of it, I'm like, why did I not introduce myself to more people or just hang out? But I still enjoyed myself, and that was the big goal for me. So the 10 steps summed up are: 1, just be aware that it's happening. 2, witness it. Don't push it away. It's there. Open the door between just pushing through it to growing through it. 3, ask your body how it needs you. Does it need to activate with somatic movement? Does it need to go somewhere safer? What does your body need? 4, ground, especially lower body focused. Get yourself present. 5, clear or seal your energy. Picture that gold bubble around you, whatever color feels comforting, like seal the bubble around you. We all have our own personal bubbles, right? 6, question any thoughts that are arising. You don't have to find answers, just question. Stay in that curiosity sometimes helps. 7, forget perfection, forget how you should, could, would show up, etc., and embrace reality. 8, assess the situation and remind yourself that you're safe if you really are safe in that moment. 9, try out the pendulation, the titration, feelings of discomfort, of pleasure, anything like that. And in 10, if you're still okay, challenge yourself to expand your growing edge at a 6 or 7. Do one thing that will make you proud of how you showed up for yourself in that moment. So if you experience a similar situation where you're having a PTSD trigger or an activation, I hope at least one of these things that I've shared helps you. Like I said, you can use all of these steps individually. You can put them together, can mix and match, do whatever you need to do. But I hope at least one thing helps. And if you don't experience any of these situations, if you don't experience being triggered or stress, anxiety, or anything like that, then I hope that this episode can offer a reminder to think about offering some understanding, some grace to people who might seem shy or socially anxious or awkward or whatever mask you see that's actually hiding the trigger that that person might be experiencing. So I hope that this helps. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show. Thank you so much for being here and sitting in this circle for our chat today. If you feel called, let me know how this impacted you by leaving a rating or review, and I'll see you next time.